Press the Let's Go Live button, which means we've got to wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet before we can go ahead and get started. And it looks like YouTube is warming up, getting rolling, which is good news. Let's check on some of the others. And it looks like they're picking us up alive and well, so let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in Scottsdale, Arizona, and today we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell. It's verdict watch time. Trial's over. Testimony's over. It's now deliberation time. The jurors are sitting back there going through 80 pages of jury instructions, trying to make heads or tails about all the stuff or nonsense or testimony or whatever you want to call it that we heard over the last 11 days or so. And so today we've got several different things we're going to check in on. I know many people are probably wondering, Rob, how the heck are you going to do a whole show about Ghislaine Maxwell when they were deliberating all day? There's not any testimony that came out. Well, fear not, my friends, because this is Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, because this is one of the biggest scandals, one of the biggest, most disgusting schemes that we've ever heard about, there's always something to talk about when it comes to Ghislaine. And so we're going to do that. We're going to check in with Judge Alison Nathan. The jurors today, of course, were deliberating. We had a couple interesting questions come out. And recall how this works. They go back to deliberate, and then they send a note out every now and then that goes over to the judges, and the judge has to communicate with the defense about the jurors' questions, how do we answer it, what type of information can we give back to the jurors. And so we've got several conversations to break down about that. But the more interesting thing that we're going to dive into today are the slides from the closing arguments that happened yesterday. On yesterday's show, we had the transcript provided by Inner City Press. Amazing follow on Twitter. He's doing a great job. And we read through a lot of the testimony. But even Inner City Press and many people who are observing the trial, guys like Joe Neerman, Good Logic, guys like Addy Ads, they could not see what was being presented. By and large, a lot of it, from what I gathered. And so that doesn't mean that there wasn't anything to see. Of course, there were slides that both sides used. The prosecutors had an entire PowerPoint deck, over 100 slides. The defense had, I think, 129 slides. And those are all now publicly available. And so we're going to go through those in detail because there is some good stuff there. There's a lot of details in these closing argument summations that are going to help us piece this all together. So we're going to check in with Alison Moe's closing arguments and the slide that she presented to the jurors yesterday. Then we're going to check in with Laura Menninger and her slides that she presented to the jurors yesterday. And so we've got a lot to get to. If you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. They're chatting away over there. Shout out to Vienticus. We've got Bispec is in the house. Let's see. My mouse is not on the screen. George Klaus is here. We've got Sousan Academy. We've got T. Blakemore. Shout out to T. Blakemore, who's here. Tweak is here, and they're all chatting away at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. There's a form that looks just like this. If you're a supporter over there, you get access to that form. You can ask questions. Of course, we're also streaming on Twitch. Shout out to Twitch and YouTube and Rumble and everybody else out there. We appreciate your support. If you're looking for clips of the show, YouTube Clips channel is the best place for those, and you can send those around to various people if you'd like to share the show. Of course, we appreciate that also. And so let's get into it. Ghislaine Maxwell Verdict Watch is starting, and we have an update to the MINDMAP. The MINDMAP has been something that has been ever evolving. Of course, we are now at the conclusion of trial, the conclusion of testimony, and so we can really see exactly how all this is piecing together. And so I updated this today, spent a little bit of time on it this afternoon. The MINDMAP is linked over in the description and basically wherever you're watching this. And so I want to show you what the defense witnesses looked like, since these are all fleshed out now. And we can see that there was a big gap. I mean, there was a ton of witnesses that were just not called. And we can actually just go down here and close a lot of this up. So we know that Isabel and Kevin Maxwell, we know Leah Safian were never called. We know Kevin Moran, the guy who ran NAG, the NAG's head, I believe is what it was, over in the UK. The NAG's head was a pub. He didn't testify. We had two very, very powerful witnesses that were expert witnesses. Ryan Hall, Dr. Park Dietz didn't testify. We have all of these transactional people that didn't testify, testifying about documents. And so we see now we're left with kind of a handful of law enforcement officials, Amanda Young, Jason Richards. We had Michael Asnaran. They all testified very, very briefly. Not much came out of them. And then we heard from Michelle Healy, an employee over at Zorro Ranch. We heard from Ava Anderson-Dubin, who was Epstein's former girlfriend, and Dominic Hippolyte, who, of course, was the Palm Beach school custodian of records. We have staff Simberly Espinoza and Raghu Sud were the two people who were staff over there. And for some reason, my Dr. Loftus has disappeared. I don't know where she went, but Dr. Loftus definitely testified for the defense. She was there this afternoon, but she disappeared. And so that's what we've got updated today. So we can sort of take a look at those. We'll get rid of these not called witnesses. And the judge is now going to be fielding questions from the jurors and asking specifically about some of these people. In particular, spending some time asking questions about the different victims. And so let's see what Judge Alison Nathan had to say about this. She started off testimony, the trial today, or the verdict watch today, at 10:10 a.m., a little bit of a late morning. So Judge Alison Nathan comes, takes the bench, says, I've got a note. Jury has a question. What do they want? Inner City Press is reporting. He says they want transcripts of the testimony of Jane, Annie, and Carolyn, which is very interesting because you notice there's a name missing. Kate. Kate's name is missing. They don't really care what she had to say, but they do want Jane, Annie, and Carolyn. Now, we're going to break that down further, but you'll notice, obviously, one of the main reasons, of course, is that Kate was a victim who was basically disqualified by the judge. Judge Alison Nathan said that Kate is not a named victim of these charges. And so the jurors, they don't want anything to do with it. They just want to see the testimony of Jane, Annie, and Carolyn. So what happens is the judge says, no problem. We're going to get those transcripts. We're going to get them wrapped up. I'm going to send them over to the court security officer who's been sworn in for this function. Okay, so this person is going to come in here and get the transcripts. Now, apparently, they're going to have some conversations about redactions of transcripts, and of course, this takes a long time. And while that all is unfolding, Inner City Press tells us courtroom is empty again. 3 long transcripts are going back to the jury. They are, because those were the full transcripts of 3 witnesses. For now, Inner City Press has the objection, and they've uploaded part of that. So then we get fast forwarding to 11 a.m. 318, still empty. But now there's several different defense lawyers sitting at Maxwell's table. Bobby Sternheim is there. At 12:55, still no prosecutors at their table. Now they're counting 2, maybe 3 if you count Safian, who of course was sort of a family lawyer. Are theirs? No more notes for the jury, and Inner City Press is just recording away. He's just sort of there reporting. No more notes for the jury. Then we get to this afternoon. Jury is still deliberating. 1:22 in the afternoon. Now Ghislaine Maxwell is brought out to the defense table. Other listed counsels scatter, and Ghislaine is talking one-on-one with Leah Safian. No In-N-Out burger photo can be seen or taken in the courtroom. But Inner City Press says something is afoot. A lot of activity. Ghislaine Maxwell talking with Leah Safian. We have the other attorneys, he says, scattering around. What could possibly be going on here? He says, well, hold on a minute. Well, just let me clamp back down on that. Clamp back down on the expectation of afootness. Maxwell has actually been taken back into the holding cell. There's a burst of activity, and sources, neither the prosecution nor the defense say, it was only just to talk about redactions on the testimony given to the jury. All right, so you see what they're fighting over, what they're battling about. So remember those transcripts that are supposed to be going back to the jurors? They came out. We want everybody except Kate, Carolyn, Jane, Annie. Well, there's a lot of conversations that are in those transcripts. That court reporter's just typing up away on there, and she's catching some stuff that comes from here and over here and over here. Some of it's objectionable. Some of it has been redacted. Some of it really shouldn't go to the jurors. We objected to that, and so we want to make sure that that's not part of the transcript. We got to go back in there and cut that out. And so that's what they're arguing about. It's not like they can just open up a Word file and just say, oh, you want the transcript? We're just going to print the transcript. Here you go, jurors. You saw everything that happened in here. No. Both sides are any of those objections that were sustained, anything that came out of a sidebar, any other testimony that was, don't pay attention to that. Now, we didn't get much of that here. We didn't see all of it, but you know how much that happens in a trial. And so they're just not going to give them the raw, unadulterated transcripts. They're going to want to make sure that that thing is narrowly tailored and crafted to support their arguments. So they're going to make arguments about that. We fast forward to this afternoon, same story. We're now at 2:51. The day's almost over. Still deliberating away. Courtroom 318 is now populating again. Jurors come back. They've got a question. Ghislaine Maxwell is now brought out. Judge Nathan says to everybody, I have a note. Here's what it says. We would like the FBI deposition 3505005 referred to by the defense. What is that document? Deposition 3505, that was referred to by the defense. So it sounds like this might be impeachment material. The defense is cross-examining somebody and referencing a deposition that somebody else took, one of the victims, and was clobbering them over the head with this. Oh, in the deposition, you said this, but today you said that. Very convenient. Isn't that interesting? And so some jurors got notes of that, and they said, hey, we want to see that. What is in that deposition document? Prosecutor screams out, well, that's not an evidence, okay? So they don't get to see that. The defense was using a prior FBI deposition, a prior recorded interview, not as an exhibit. That document was never admitted as evidence, but they were using it to impeach a victim or a prior witness. And they were saying, listen, you just testified when the government was asking you questions that X, Y, and Z happened. But you told the FBI in 3505 that this happened, didn't you? And so the jurors are saying, she didn't sound credible there. So, we'd like to see that 3505. We'd like to tell the judge. Send him a note. Write it down. We want 3505 sent to the judge. And the prosecutor says, that's great. The defense used that, but that's not in evidence. So they don't get to see that. Prosecutor is objecting to that, obviously. It's impeachable. It's impeachment material. Menninger, or one of Maxwell's lawyer, said that, okay, well, that 3505, what we're talking about here is impeachment of Carolyn. We remember Carolyn. Carolyn was the third victim who came out, and her story was pretty weak. If you have to rank them, I think she may have been the worst. Very emotional, lot of history with her, a lot of, sort of weird lawsuits that were flying all over the place, history of drugs and abuse, and so she just didn't seem as credible as some of the others. Now, there is impeachment material about her in that document, and they know that it's not in evidence, and so they're having a conversation about how to answer the jurors. They've got a question. Well, what do we say to them? We tell them it's not in evidence? So Judge Nathan says, well, no, we can't tell them that it's not in evidence. How about we just say this? All admitted exhibits are before you. Because they can't say no. So they have to say all admitted exhibits are before you. Prosecutor says, all right, that's fine with me. But then Maxwell's lawyer says, well, hang on a minute. Let's hold on a minute now. Hold on. Says, why don't we say, rather than all admitted exhibits are before you, let's say you have the admitted evidence about 3505. Just don't say that it is not in evidence. Okay, because if you say that it's not in evidence, well, then I have some concerns about that. If you tell the jurors, okay, that 3505 is not in evidence, well, then maybe they don't consider it. And Judge, that's a big part of my impeachment testimony. My cross-examination was based on this. So I don't want you to say anything about it not being in evidence. Nathan says, well, they're asking for the document, and I presume because they have the testimony about it, right? Like they have the transcript that actually talks about this. They have Laura Menninger or whoever was doing the cross-examination at the time beating up on Carolyn saying, oh, your 3505, your FBI deposition says something entirely different. Okay, all of that is in the transcript. That's all written down. It's, sentence by sentence in there. They don't care about that. They want the actual depo document. And so Judge Nathan is saying, well, they want that document because they have the testimony about it, so they want to dive into it. So Judge Nathan then pauses and starts to write something out by hand. Just kind of scribbling down there on the bench. So she writes something like this. She says, it is not an exhibit. The testimony about it you have. So I'll just send a note in for efficiency. I'll say this. I'll say 3505 is not an admitted exhibit, but the testimony about it you have. How's that sound? Prosecutor says, yeah, that sounds right. And the defense says, yeah, okay, I have that. Yeah, it's not an admitted exhibit, so you can't see that document, but you do have the testimony about it, and you can consider that as evidence. Oh, okay, so the defense says that sounds pretty good, because the defense wants this to land. They don't want them to say, no, you can't have that, because then they say, well, why can't I have? Or the prosecutors don't want them to say, no, you can't have that. Then the prosecutors are looking like maybe they're trying to hide something. So they want to craft how this goes, right? You see how important this is? It sounds so stupid. Maybe. Not to me. It sounds like it's incredibly important. The jurors are giving you a hint. They're opening the door into their minds. They're saying, this is what we're thinking about. Carolyn kind of sounds like she might be a liar. And there was a deposition that took place. We're reading it in the testimony, and we want to look into that. And so the defense is going, perfect. She is a liar, and let's show you how. And so they're trying to craft a little bit of a statement to insert that right into the middle of the jury deliberations. How can we concoct this little note and use the power of persuasion and the manipulation of the language to get us an unfair advantage? Both sides are doing it. And so you can see that takes a long time. One question. Very important. We have another question. Now, after that happens, before we get into that next question, what do we have now? Now that there was a note that came out, Maxwell's lawyer want a copy of it. They say, you know what? We want to see that note. Because that's how important it is. They send a note out, and we want to see the handwriting. We want to see the font that this person used. Did they write in capitals or all lowercase? So what's going on here? Man, woman, guy, girl, what's going on? So they actually summon Judge Alison Nathan to come back out, and she has. They say, Judge, we want a copy of that note. And Judge Nathan says, well, the foreperson signed it, so all right, we're going to have to redact it, I guess, if you want a copy of it. So we're going to have to go through the redaction process. Let me read it to you again right here. So the judge reads it out again. They want copies of the depo. Well, they're not going to get it. And so then Judge Nathan clarifies this a little bit and says, well, counsel, you're already aware of the identity of the jurors, so I'll just redact it for the public. And the public can get the redacted version so we don't see the name of the juror. How's that sound? All good. All rise. Everybody stands up. Now we're back to verdict watch. No verdict at this time. We fast forward in time at 4:06 p.m. We're coming to the close of the day. Judge Alison Nathan reconvenes. I have received a note, she says. The jurors say they want to end the day today at 5 p.m. It's not even a question. It's just a note. And they're telling us that their schedule tomorrow really should be from 9 to 4:30. And then they want to have lunch at noon. So they're setting terms, I guess. The jurors are sending out to the judge. This is when we're going to be deliberating and available tomorrow. Just so that you know. So the judge says, okay, well, it is possible for them to deliberate on Thursday. So we've got a full day of Wednesday. They technically could deliberate on Thursday. Then we've got Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day. And so we have a little bit of a precarious position to be in, don't we? We've got a hard clock coming up. Christmas. And we all know that Ghislaine Maxwell wants to get this thing wrapped up before her birthday on the 25th. She doesn't want this thing hanging over her head while she has to celebrate. And so the defense has to sort of gauge what they want to do here. Do they want a quick verdict or do they want a long verdict? Do they want to encourage the jurors to just process all this information and get it over with? Or do they want them to really drag this thing out and slog it out and consider every little piece of detail, every little piece of evidence? We don't know. But they give us a little bit of a hint. They tell us that Maxwell's lawyer, Bobby Sternheim, asked the judge about that. Will you offer them Thursday, she says, so that they can make arrangements? We'd actually prefer that. Yeah, go ahead and give them Thursday and let them know. You're going to be here on Thursday, and so you better take that time off. Tell your family you're not coming home, whatever. You're due for deliberations. Judge Nathan kind of agrees, says, yeah, we could tell them that. And this is a little bit of a change. Remember yesterday, I'm sorry, maybe it was not yesterday, but it was earlier, when they were trying to scramble in their last witnesses. Remember the defense was going to fly that guy, Mr. Moran, over from the UK to come in here. He was over at the Nag's Head, couldn't get him. They got a couple bad rulings from the judge. They couldn't call in those other lawyers. They couldn't go into a lot of lines of questioning with those law enforcement officials. And so they're case was just kind of cut out from under them. They couldn't talk about any of the prosecutorial integrity problems, none of that. So they rested very quickly, but not without a little bit of what felt like a little bit of panic there at the end. Like they wanted to extend this thing beyond Christmas because Bobby Sternheim in the defense said multiple times, we don't want them to feel rushed. We don't want them to go in there and just make a split decision and feel like Ghislaine Maxwell, she's going to keep me home for my kids during the holiday season. It's Christmas week and I'm very angry about this. And so I'm going to take it out on somebody. I don't want to sit here deliberating with these knuckleheads. Let's get this over with and just vote her guilty. The defense is saying we don't want that. But now it sounds like they kind of do want them deliberating. Maybe we cram it in there on Thursday and then they can just come back and make a ruling. Bobby Sternheim says they want to do that. But then we get a very interesting question right before the end of the day. After the jurors dictate their schedule to the court, 4:30 p.m. they have another note and another question. Very interesting one. They ask, can we consider Annie's testimony conspiracy to commit a crime in counts 1 and 3? Prosecutor springs out of her seat. Yes, you can. Say yes. Tell him yes. Tell him yes, you can. Maxwell's lawyer says, hold on, not so fast. Take it easy over there, buddy boy. They say, listen, if someone asks, can I drive? You could answer yes, but within the speed limit. And so Judge Nathan just decides on this. Yeah, you may. Right? So Annie, that's exactly what her testimony was really for, if we recall. Remember, the judge said that the actual contact between Annie and Maxwell or Epstein, the allegations, weren't illegal. So as to that physical contact, that is not illegal. Kate is not a victim, period. Annie is not a victim as to that type of conduct. But not about the conspiracy. She was not excluded from that analysis. And so this is just very consistent with that. Now, the jury, very interestingly, caught that. Right? They saw a little bit of a disconnect in the rules. They saw, judge said that we can't consider Kate, so anything with her has to be gone. But now we're saying Annie, she was only for the other counts, but does that disqualify her as a victim as to the other conspiracy charge? They asked that. Very good question. Same question I had. Obviously, the judge says, no, yeah, you can consider that. The conspiracy testimony from Annie can count for counts 1 and 3, says the judge. Now, this is what they're looking at. This is why it matters, because they're going through this and they're saying, we got to check one of these boxes here. Count 1, conspiracy to entice individuals to engage in travel and activity, guilty or not guilty. We got to know, when they're asking about 1 and 3, can we use what we heard from Annie in our analysis? Judge said, yeah, you certainly can. And so we're wrapping up here. There's a photo that was shared by Inner City Press. We just saw that. Now we get the conclusion. Jury comes back and they discuss the timing tomorrow. Yeah, 9 to 4:30 is fine. You can have lunch at noon. Sounds like they're already preparing to deliberate all day, like they're not even close. Your lunch order is on your already ordered. They're planning for a nice meal. They say, listen, if you have not completed your deliberations, it's possible for you to continue your deliberation on December 23rd. So get ready. If you people don't come to a decision, you're coming back here on Thursday. Wear your masks, except when you're eating or drinking. Thank you. Jury leaves. So Judge Nathan says, okay, you lawyers, did you people finally finish agreeing to the redactions on the transcripts? And the prosecutor says, yeah, we did. We spent the last all day going through the redactions. And Nathan says, well, let me tell you this. It's pretty frustrating to have them wait for 3 hours while you two can work out these redactions. And then they're adjourned for the day. Inner City Press reporting from the courthouse.
Okay, here we are. Not Foley Square. We're in Pearl Street, just off Foley Square. The first full day of deliberations has ended, and it ended with a bang. It ended with a jury question whether they can use the testimony of Annie to convict for conspiracy under counts 1 and 3. As some have said, not a good question for the defense. But they didn't decide today, and in fact, they've already ordered up their lunch for tomorrow, the lunch being at noon, and they want to work till 4:30 tomorrow, which implies that they might go into Thursday, and that's what Judge just what Judge Nathan has said. I'm going to flip this around so you can see we can do a real stand-up here. Here you go. There's the door. There's the people waiting. I believe that the brother, Kevin Maxwell, he should be coming out soon. Maybe Leah Safian, the legal mind. In and out burger. Hang on. Is the door opening? The lights are on. And we're ready to roll. We're going to turn around. This is one, rather than the question that we've asked before, Kevin Maxwell, whether the UN ever responded to their petition. The UN, which of course supported Ghislaine Maxwell and also had a Epstein UN fellowship. But now we have a more serious question. What do they make of that question? And what do they think now? The jurors maybe reaching a decision, let's say on the 23rd, just before Christmas? Would that be a grounds for appeal?
Good question. Very good question. So that's Inner City Press, and he's doing an amazing job. So please go follow him. You know, a lot of what we cover here would not be possible without guys like him and him in particular. So he's at Inner City Press on Twitter. Awesome follow. He's doing a great job. But he asked a very good question. You know, and this might be part of the reason why the defense has changed their tune a little bit, and they say we're okay sort of if the judge pushes this thing, because he's saying, well, maybe this is an appealable issue. Maybe if Ghislaine Maxwell is convicted, the judge is going to say, the defense is going to say during an appeal, of course she was convicted. They forced this thing down. The jurors were not thinking about justice in this case. They were thinking about going home and having their eggnog with their little Johnny by the fireplace. So, you know, they're going to say that was a violation of her due process. She didn't get the right to a fair trial. Part of a fair trial is a jury has reasonable time to deliberate and come to conclusions. And so they're going to, of course, raise this in their check boxes of appealable issues, which they have a whole slew of them. So now that we know what happened today, this is how deliberations are going to continue to look, and we'll continue to cover them. We now have to talk about closing arguments. Ghislaine Maxwell closing arguments took place yesterday, and we didn't get to see much because there was redactions and blank screens everywhere you turn, as has been the case in this proceeding for quite some time. But we do have some documents that came out. The slides from both the prosecution and the defense are now available publicly. Inner City Press threw them in a PDF and put them up on Document Cloud. And if you're over checking out the MINDMAP and you want to follow along, you're free to do that. Come over here to the important documents section. And if you scroll into the important documents section and you roll all the way down here, you're going to see closing argument documents. Closing argument documents, we've got 3 different documents here. We've got the jury instructions. We went through some of those yesterday, but they're now here on the MINDMAP and available. They're 83 pages. So if you want to see what the jurors are looking at, you can just click this PDF and it will open up. We also have the prosecution slides and we have the defense slides. And so you can actually take a look at all of the documents here, and we are going to do that. We're going to start off with the government slides. This is from their closing arguments. And you can see this looks exactly like a government slide. It looks like it was written on a 1980s computer terminal or something like that. Okay, it's the Calibri font on blue background. Blue background. Yeah, that's the word. And so here's what we see. Now, a lot of these are exhibits, okay? This is stuff that was submitted to the jurors that we have not seen till this point. Okay, Government Exhibit 422. And look at this letter. Remember, this letter was read in court. They're saying that this is written by Ghislaine Maxwell. That she was writing this about Jeffrey and Ghislaine in the third person. And sometimes people do this, right? They write in the third person. They write what their future lives look like. They sort of future self-author. Very powerful technique, actually. So she may have been doing that. I don't know. Jeffrey and Ghislaine, she says, allegedly, this is her. They've been together a couple for 11 years. They are, contrary to what many people think, rarely apart. I almost always see them together. Ghislaine, apparently writing about herself, says, Ghislaine is highly intelligent and great company with a ready smile and an infectious laugh, who always puts one at one's ease and always makes one feel welcome. Jeffrey and Ghislaine share many mutual interests. They have a lot of fun together. They both have a keen, searching, and inquisitive minds. She grew up among scientists and in an academic and business environment. They share a love of travel and art. She speaks 5 languages. She enjoys spending time visiting auction houses. She says that is the best way to learn about arts and antiques. You're expected to look and touch and ask questions. Ghislaine also has her own interests and her own business pursuits. She's independent and strong-willed, something which Jeffrey loves about her. She's adventurous. She flies helicopters. She's athletic. She rides horses, plays tennis, skis, and scuba dives. She's a serious photographer, always has a camera in hand, who's collaborating with some sort of leading people involved in the cutting edge of digital photography. Jeffrey and Ghislaine complement each other well, and I cannot imagine one without the other, she says. On top of being great partners, they're also best friends in life. Very interesting. Now, this is Exhibit 422, and they submitted this in front of the jury. And if you recall from the testimony, they say that they went in there, they looked at the metadata, and guess who wrote this document? GMAX did. Wonder who that could be. So this is Exhibit 422B, and when you dive into that a little bit further, they actually go into the registry software information, and they show that GMAX installed Service Pack number 1 on Microsoft Windows 2000. Which was probably very necessary at the time. And so the testimony continues, and you can see they're highlighting this from the language. 11 years. They're rarely apart. I almost always see them together. They're great partners. They're best of friends. And remember the conversation that we had a lot about this. Victim or villain. Defense, she's a victim. She had nothing to do with this. Jeffrey Epstein was the prime mover on all of this, and she was just a victim along for the ride, who's really being abused and part of his trail, his wake of destruction. Prosecutor said not at all. They are partners. They are colleagues. They are compadres in this whole thing. And you can see that highlighted here. We went through a lot of these photographs. So did the government, evidently. You can see here. They are going to be splaying these all around for the jurors as well. This was that scene allegedly out by the Queen's cabin. Apparently the Queen stayed over there. This is when they're frolicking around and he's got his red jumpsuit on. You can see a lot of these photographs we spent some time on, riding around on motorcycles, attending holiday parties, going duck hunting with their pup. Lots of hugs, lots of kisses. Now, we're going to see what the defense had to say about this. And they said that these are just selective photos. Remember that they just picked these out of the bucket, the worst photos to make them look like partners, but they're not really. Now we see some of these other photos. Remember Exhibit 342? The old massage. Now before these were released to the public, there's another photograph here. I think we have that one. But it might be the foot up in the bosom in closer proximity. We see New York. The testimony went over to his residence there. We see the Zorro Ranch out in the hills of New Mexico, isolated from all society. We see the place in Palm Beach that was raided by the FBI. Here's the place over in London, Exhibit 705. Here's Little St. James. And the prosecutor was just going through each one of these, one by one, and showing the opulence of this guy, showing the scheme, showing everything that was happening all around, and then recounts everything from Alessi's testimony. And remember, this is how the government started out. Alessi, Juan, not John, even though those racist jerks, Ghislaine and Jeffrey, kept calling him John and told him not to have bulges in his pockets, part of the household manual. Only Epstein can have bulges. The manual says so. So we're going through the direct testimony of Alessi. And he said Ghislaine defined herself as being lady of the house. Remember this household manual? Lady Ghislaine notepads were supposed to be everywhere. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, cards and envelopes. They were all over the place. 3 sizes of notepads, letterhead, stationery. It was Mr. Epstein, Miss Maxwell, and their guests. It wasn't Mr. Epstein and his guests. Notice how there's 2 people there? They're together. They want a copy of the telephone directories placed next to the telephones. We have Mr. Epstein's breakfast preferences. He wants water, coffee, sweet and low or equal in his coffee, creamer with half and half, warmed in the microwave for 25 seconds, and then he's going to tell you what he wants to eat, okay? Maxwell wants Maxwell House coffee, which is very interesting. Ghislaine Maxwell only drinks Maxwell House coffee, served with milk and freshly squeezed orange juice and a glass of water. She also wants 1 Weetabix with sliced banana, whatever that is, milk and sugar on the side. So these are partners. These are not, this is not a victim. She's getting her Maxwell House coffee along with everybody else. All right. And so the House manual just keeps going through. If somebody calls for Maxwell, it's in the manual. She's not available. Can I take a message? And when you answer the residence, you say, good morning. This is the Epstein Maxwell residence. You don't say, good morning. This is the Epstein residence. Right? They're a couple. Exhibit 606. Household manual goes through all those different documents. We have shampoo and massage products. Yesterday, we talked about this on the show. All those tubes of glop in the shower, whatever shower that was. I was wondering, what is all this glop for? How much stuff can you slather all over your face and body? Enough already. Well, this is the list. Aloe mask, body mask, oil, cream, all from Kiehl's. We got Phytology. We got Phytorhum fortifying with rum and eggs. What does that cost? $1,000 an ounce, probably. Rum and eggs for Phytorhum fortifying, whatever. All right. So GMAX also wrote this document apparently. She said, I need 35 vials of glop for my body. Then we start talking about poor Juan Alessi has to clean up the torpedoes and put those back into certain areas. Part of the household manual also says, remember that you see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. Respect everybody's privacy. Mind your business. We continue to go through the closing documents, the closing slides. Mr. Alessi, what did that mean to you? It meant I was supposed to be blind, deaf, and dumb. I was supposed to say nothing about their lives. We have Dr. Rocchio. Now we get into her testimony, and so they're giving us a breakdown of this. Remember Dr. Rocchio, she gives us the 5 stages of grooming. First, you got to select and identify. Then you got to obtain access to them and isolate them. Then you have to engage in lies and deception. You have to manipulate them. And you want to build a relationship of trust and attachment. Once you have their trust, then it's very easy. We're going to desensitize that person to certain types of contact. And then once they're desensitized, then guess what? We're going to escalate that contact. And we're going to coerce and try to continue the abuse and reduce the likelihood of disclosure. And then we see some photographs. Government Exhibit 101. Who could that be? Well, we know that was Annie Farmer. And we know that there was another conversation here about Carolyn, talking about what was being touched and where. Did Maxwell ever touch you? She said yes, said Jane. Jane said that Maxwell did on her chest. And so you can see what's happening here. We go through the 5 stages of grooming, and then the government prosecutor, Moe, is now connecting every single victim. Talked about Jane, talked about Carolyn, now talking about Annie. Annie said, I was very uncomfortable. I was fearful. I wanted it to be over with. We see Exhibit 741. This is the $200,000 that was paid for by Mr. Jeffrey Epstein over to the Interlochen School of Arts. Remember, that was for the Scholarship Lodge. And so we had a lot of the different transactional witnesses who were explaining how Epstein was performing all of these instances of grooming, all the different steps, access. How do you do that? You're looking at it. The Interlochen School of Arts, $200,000. They're going to give me a lodge. Perfect. I'm going to have an unlimited supply of access to young people. Perfect. For a measly $200,000, no problem at all. He does it. We see Interlochen is exchanging, messages back and forth. Jane says that when Epstein approached her, that she was shocked. She was 14 years old. Some pretty aggressive testimony here. Very embarrassing. You're 14. You have no idea what's going on. First time anything like this has happened to me. And he even used torpedoes on a 14-year-old. I've never seen anything like this, she says. We see Government Exhibit 904. And we've talked a lot about these photographs. All of these are redacted. And again, we don't know if these redactions are only public or what the jurors are going to see. Okay, the jurors could be seeing some of these photographs, or they could not, because the defense may have been successful in arguing that these were too bad, the photos were too damaging, and that anybody who sees a photo like that would just presume that anybody who would have a photo like that in their house must be guilty of something. So the defense might say, look, it's just too bad they can't see it. it's too probative. I'm sorry, it's too prejudicial and not probative, right? So the same concept over here. I have an idea of what that photo is. Is that the Bill Clinton photo right there? That might be the Bill Clinton photo. I don't know. But Prosecutor Moe continues with her testimony. Alessi, when you first met Jane, how old did he appear? Did she appear? 14, he says. Alessi turns out to be a pretty big part of this testimony. We have Matt. Remember Matt? Matt was, I believe, Jane's ex-boyfriend. Jane told Matt that she was 14 when she met him. So we have another witness who's going to support the prosecution's case. Matt says that her mother said that the money wasn't free. In other words, the mother was almost kind of selling her daughter away. We go back to expert Rocchio. Rocchio tells us, Rocchio is, of course, the grooming expert, tells us a little bit more about the process. And then we go back to Jane. Ava joined in. Michelle joined in. Remember that testimony from Jane? All these people joined in these group activities. Annie Farmer in a big redaction. Annie Farmer wrote in the journal. We have a little bit from that. She says, something, something, something in my dream dress. One night we went to the movies with Jeffrey Epstein. It was a little weird, one of those things that is hard to explain. We were sitting next to each other. He put his hand for me to hold, and we were holding hands. Not weird, normal and fine. Then he kind of caressed and rubbed my arm, and that shoe foot, something, can't read that. She says, it's one of those things that just gave me a weird feeling, but wasn't that weird and probably normal. The one thing that kind of weirded me out about it was he was let go of my hand when he was talking to Maria. Oh, well, I decided it was no big deal. It just made me mad because he... whatever. He caressed, rubbed my arm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so that's fine. I mean, that's all about Jeffrey Epstein again. She continues. And are we going to see anything about Maxwell? She says, it just made me mad because he is being so amazing. Paying for a summer program for me and helping me with college. He's so nice and so generous. And I just don't want to have any weird things about it. Weird feelings about it. I couldn't say anything to Maria about it because she worships him. It would just be problems. I couldn't tell anyone else because it is still not a big deal. I didn't want to portray him in a bad light. I really don't think it is. We don't know what else there is. And so the prosecutors are showing this to the jurors and saying, you can see what's happening here. This creep show is creeping on her slowly. Maybe at this incident, it wasn't all illegal, pretty normal at this point. Not normal. Let me correct that right now. Not normal at all, but not overtly criminal. Well, that's not true either. If she's 14, I think this is all pretty much crossing the line. But what the defense has done here is they've tried to turn this into something that is more benign. Okay, so if you recall, we're going to see this in the defense's closing arguments. But they come out and you see this language specifically talking about holding hands and this not weird language. I want to point that out before we move on. Gave me a weird feeling, but it was also sort of not weird right here. The defense is latching onto this. It's just hand holding. It's not weird. You said it was not weird. You said it was normal and fine. But maybe you changed your story, right, is what they're saying. And so the prosecution is going to say, that's not at all. That's not the point we're making here. The point here is that this is very early on in the grooming phase. This is like at second stage. Okay, we got 3 more stages to go before it really gets bad, but this is the warming up part. It started with the identification, interlock, and now we're getting to the escalation phase. And so the defense is going to say, yeah, I mean, right here, this isolated incident, the hand-holding thing, okay, maybe that's kind of weird for an older guy or younger person or whatever. They're fighting about the age in general. but and saying that this all took place 3 years after the fact, when Jane saw the Lion King Broadway play when she was much older, 17, not 14. So they're contesting that, but they're also contesting the fact that it's a feeling that's weird or not. Saying you said it wasn't weird, now you're saying it is, because you've been manipulated and you've collected $5 million. So now we get to see what she's specifically talking about in Exhibit 604. The closing argument slides continue. Annie talks about her experience, about Epstein wanting her to rub his feet. We see some more photographs here from Kate's direct testimony. We have a little bit of conversation about squeezing him. We see some more exhibits here. Traveling around, playing with elephants. We have a couple different law enforcement officers. Mulligan and other employees are now testifying. We see a photograph. I believe that's Virginia Guffrey. Conversations about Alessi. Miss Maxwell saying, "John, stop." His name's Juan Maxwell. But when they were driving down, Maxwell saw a girl and demanded that Juan stop the car so she could get out and go talk to her. She was recruiting. Here's a photograph of the bedroom with all the tubes of glop that Ghislaine Maxwell demands she has. We have a lot of conversations about setting up these massages. Remember, Carolyn and her boyfriend would receive calls. Sarah Kellen would be the person who would sometimes call. Epstein never did it, though. Sarah or Maxwell would reach out. And so you can see how they had a little procedure for actually setting up these massages. Carolyn told a woman's name, said it was Maxwell. She was the one who was orchestrating the whole thing. Government Exhibit 606, we dive back into the manual. And this is where they're going to spend a little bit of time, it looks like, diving into Government Exhibit 52. The phone book, the telephone directories, the black book. JE and GM telephone directories must be placed to the side of the telephones in all the bedrooms except for the guest rooms. To the right. Remember, this is back in the 90s. You don't have an iPhone where you can just scroll through and log all your massages. So a series of different exhibits all showing that these should be placed to the right of the telephone. We see some more exhibits talking about some serious funds being transferred. And remember, this is part of the narrative that the government has been saying. You see this document. This is from JP Morgan. And it shows a transfer by wire for Ghislaine Maxwell in the amount of $18,300,000. $18.3 million bucks. Why on earth, the prosecution says, would Jeffrey Epstein be transferring $18 million, much more than that, I think it's like $30.3 million in sum, to Maxwell? Why? Because she was providing him something that he wanted very badly, and she was good at getting it for him. The documents continue. 18 million bucks, another 5 million bucks transferred on September 1, 2002 for Ghislaine Maxwell. You can see another here, about 7.6 million bucks wired over in Exhibit 502, 7.4 million there. Shifting a lot of money around. Whoa, there it is. This is what I'm talking about. So you can see $7.4 million here and a lot of money. All right. And so they're trying to show that Epstein was paying Ghislaine to provide him with females. She goes through the different counts, 6 different counts, and we're going to explain specifically what the law says. Now, pay close attention to this. Let's do a compare and contrast on this portion, right? During a closing argument, they teach you that one of the things you should be doing is communicating to the jury exactly what they should do so that they know. It's like a call to action, right? At the end of a sales call or at the end of a business meeting, it's book a meeting from a meeting or what happens next or who does what by when. You got to tell the jurors, need you to do this. You heard all the facts. This is what the law says. Here's exactly how to interpret them. So they have action items and the jurors go, okay, I'm going to go, you're talking to a couple jurors. go back and do this thing. And hopefully some people pick it up and they go do it. And they listen to you because they like what you had to say throughout the entirety of the trial. So they start to define the law for us. We're not going to spend much time on this, very boring and drab. They have all of this in the jury instructions. And again, see how the defense does this versus how we're looking at this now, how the prosecution is doing it. They say count 2 now. Okay, the defendant knowingly transported individuals, recruited. It's the very nut and bolts law, right? So they're defining that for us. They're going to go through some of the testimony. Loftus, during her cross-examination, said that sometimes people can remember the core event and the core details. Remember that? And so they're saying even the defense expert says that you can take some testimony from her exam and use it in our favor. And so that's what we've got here. That's what they're leaving the jurors with, it sounds like. Here's what the law says. Even Loftus agrees. They say counts 1, 3, and 5. 2 or more persons entered the unlawful agreement. They knowingly and willfully became a member. All right, so this is all pretty boring, pretty bland stuff. If you're a juror, you can be asking yourself, what do I do with this? What are you supposed to do at the conclusion of this thing? Okay, so that is the government's closing arguments, their closing slides. We saw a number of new exhibits. We saw a number of new sentences and transcripts. We got to actually read from Annie Farmer's testimony, and so there was a lot there. Ghislaine Maxwell's defense team also gave closing arguments, and they also have slides that are now publicly available. And so we can see how they're going to be rebutting all the allegations of the government. And so the way that this goes, as we talked about yesterday, prosecution presents their closing argument first, the defense goes second, then the prosecution gets a rebuttal close because life's not fair for defendants. But that is what happens. Now, we're not going to be able to see the rebuttal close because it's really, I think, from the same set of slides. But here we can see how the defense is now responding. Ghislaine Maxwell's defense team delivers their closing arguments, and these are the slides. Remember, Laura Menninger was the defense attorney who came out and delivered these. And the very first slide that we see, the theme of the case. The beautiful theme, it's done in triplets, a trilogy. We see that it also has some very nice alliteration there. Money, manipulation, and memory. It's even symmetrical, isn't it? You have the 3-syllable word that is spelled wrong, manipulation, that is spelled wrong, actually, very interesting. That is in the center. And then you have the 2-syllable words on either side. No, memory's 3 syllables. So why would money? Yeah, it's not symmetrical at all. And it's spelled wrong. Okay, so never mind. Okay, so they continue their closing arguments. And now this is interesting. This is not something that I was expecting, but what they're showing is Epstein, Epstein, Epstein. Look at all of Epstein's houses. And you can see this. We see the place in New York, top left. We see the place in London. Another place, it looks like both of these places may be the same in Palm Beach. Several different photographs of that. We see several different photographs of Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, down here at the bottom. And we see a little bit more from him. We see his cars, that he's got a lot of them. Looks like an Escalade. We see Epstein's airplanes. A lot of them. Exhibit 301, 302, 303, 311. He's got a number of different models, different makes. Several of them. I think he actually upgraded. So, some of these may not still be around. In other words, he may not have owned these all at the same time, but he had a lot of planes. And he also had helicopters too. And you can see we've got 3-4 slides that are all Jeffrey Epstein. Haven't even talked about Ghislaine Maxwell yet. This is a Ghislaine Maxwell trial. We're talking about Epstein. Yep, he's got planes. Yep, he's got properties. Yep, he's got helicopters. Yep, he's got money. Yep, 8 million here, 2 million here, 5 million there. Got all that. He's got message pads too. Yeah, so the government is really focused on these things. Yeah, he's got those. Several different versions. Several different locations. And he's also got flight logs. And we can see those too. And all of these, of course, are heavily redacted. We can't actually see the names on them. But he's got the flight logs. And you notice Epstein, Epstein, Epstein. We're on slide 8 now. Still talking about Epstein. He's got private island that has a number of different beautiful properties on that. Epstein has in those properties binders. We have full drawers of CDs that have a lot of different photographs in them. And remember what the government said. Remember Menninger came out here in her closing argument and said, the government came out and showed you a lot of photographs. But where are the 37,000 of the rest of them? Yeah, it's interesting. They went through tens of thousands of photographs and they picked out the photographs that they wanted to show you that tell the narrative that they want to tell. That these two are a little lovebird. They're romantic partners in this affair. But what about the other photographs? Those were missing. And so the slides continue, and you can see that they're talking about very interesting relationships. And they're building out, it looks like, connections. Robert Glassman and Jane, the lawyer. Remember this conversation we had this previously. If we go back over to the mind map, and we go down to some of the witnesses that were not called in this case, we are going to see that Jane and Robert Glassman were in this list under legal witnesses. Robert Glassman is here, and he represented Jane in a lawsuit. And the allegations were that a prosecutor, a government prosecutor, emailed Robert Glassman and said, you have a problem with your client. She said that she saw the Broadway play. Guess what that makes her? 17. If she saw the movie The Lion King, that would make her 14. Maybe we should hint that she saw the movie and not the play. And so that may have been a problematic email. If a U.S. attorney was sending that and saying, maybe your witness needs to remember something a little bit differently, gigantic problem. And so Menninger is talking about that, saying, yeah, these lawyers were really behind a lot of this. Glassman told Jane that cooperating would help her case. There was a stipulation that Glassman, the lawyer for Jane, stated before the government charged the case that Jane had discussed with Glassman whether to cooperate. Should we cooperate with the government here? Jane is working with Glassman to file a lawsuit to get a bunch of money. Glassman, the lawyer, says, Jane, cooperate with the lawyer. Not only is it the morally right thing to do, but it's also going to, quote, help with your case. So as we're going and collecting money from the victim's compensation fund, if you prosecute her criminally, that will be useful, because we went through and we talked about all those different documents from the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, and part of their analysis in determining about whether to pay out a claim or not, is there active litigation? Are we being sued? Is there an active criminal investigation? Is anybody being prosecuted? Is anybody filing criminal charges? If the answer is yes, that elevates your claim because they want to resolve that. It's an open lawsuit. They want to resolve it, pay you, go away. And so here Glassman is saying, if you want to collect a big fat payout, you better say that you were harmed by a lot of people. Ghislaine Maxwell, add her to the list. She says, should I cooperate? Yeah, of course. Sure. It'll help your case. And so what we see now here is Laura Menninger just connecting all the dots. Sigrid McCauley. We have Stan Pottinger, Richard Willits. And these are names that we have not seen before here. They're not even on the mind map. But we do have Brad Edwards. We have Jack Scarola, all on the mind map. And these people were not called as witnesses. Jack Scarola, same situation. He's represented one of the victims. And Brad Edwards, same thing here. You probably saw him from, I think, the Netflix movie, the Netflix series. So all of these people now are representing and closely intertwined with all of the different victims. And there's a lot of, interesting conversations that are happening back and forth. And Sigrid McCauley, remember, over from the mind map, she's representing a ton of different victims, all from the Epstein wing of the analysis. You can see here. Where is Sigrid? Yeah, Sigrid McCauley's down here. So she's working with Virginia Guffrey. I think she's representing several people. I believe Teresa Helm is being represented by Sigrid McCauley. Yeah. So she's all over the place. David Boies. Lawyers are everywhere. And so you can see, folks, this almost looks like a mind map, if I can be so candid about it. Not quite as detailed as ours, but, you know, it's pretty good. And it's a lot more simple. It's very easy for the jurors to see there's a lot of activity going on. Robert Glassman had some connection with the witnesses in this case. Robert Glassman, Boyes Schiller, Brad Edwards, Jack Scarola. These are all lawyers who were trying to get money. And they're all having conversations with all of these victims. And they're all having conversations with the media and the witnesses and with other family members. And everybody's telling them there's this big bucket of money called the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. And if you have a real serious claim, you too can get paid. And guess what? The attorneys are taking a big fat cut of that, aren't they? 40%, 50%. They're getting paid a lot. We know that Jane got, what, $2.9 million out of her 5 total? Where do you think that rest of that money went? Where'd the $2.1 million go? Yeah, it went to her lawyers. A lot of money. And so if the lawyers are now hinting and sort of communicating and encouraging their own clients to change their stories, you're not going to get paid unless you have somebody to go claim against. Epstein's dead. Pick someone else. Oh, Maxwell. Yeah, she was there a lot. Pomerantz was a U.S. prosecutor, is a U.S. prosecutor. And she said during her opening statement or during the early onset of the case, says, you're going to hear from relatives from some of the victims. And the defense is pointing that out. They say, let's talk about it. Here's Jane. Remember Jane's testimony? When Jane was testifying, she took the stand. And we saw this. We called this out when it was happening. She had a whole lot of I don't recalls. Remember this? Menninger said, you know, when you spoke with the government in February 2020, they asked you if Ghislaine and Epstein were in the same room. You said you're not sure, right? So in February of 2020, just over a year ago, they asked you if there were at times just you and Epstein in the room. You said, I don't know. You said you were not sure, right? She says, I don't recall. Can't remember it. Okay. You don't recall that. Okay, fine. How about this? You said you don't recall whether or not the government told you that Ghislaine and Jeffrey were alone in a room together. You were not sure that ever happened. Do you recall that testimony? No, I don't recall that either. As you sit here today, you're not sure whether you were ever in the room alone with Ghislaine and Epstein, right? She says no. She can't even pinpoint whether she was alone with Maxwell or Epstein. So yeah, her testimony's full of the I don't recalls. There was a lawsuit that took place that Jane filed previously. There was an interrogatory that took place. This is a civil lawsuit, and you can ask questions of each other. Item number 9 in the interrogatory from Jane's lawsuit: identify all other persons other than the defendant who've tried to abuse you. Response from them: none. So the argument is that they didn't identify Maxwell, who committed misconduct or anything else. Now, then we go through, we see just redactions all over the place. We've got GX12 redacted. J3, 4, and 5 redacted. We've got, looks like Customs and Border Patrol records showing Jane returning from an international trip at age 15. Remember that trip to Italy? Flight records. Now, this is going to be redacted because obviously it has her name on it, but she was age 15, apparently, when she came back, and Border Patrol reviewed that. Jane said that no individual was paying for her to go to Interlaken. She told you that, but guess what? Not true at all. We have application info that shows that she did. At 16, guess what? Jane sued her teacher, her principal, and her guidance. So she sued a bunch of people when she was 16 years old. In fact, here's her court record. Okay. She also returned back from an international trip at 16. Flight records show that as well. So this poor, girl that had nothing going on for her, flying all over the place. And then she said something about that Lion King movie. We know the dates about this. Parties stipulate that the Lion King, the Broadway musical, opened in New York City on October 15th, 1997. Official opening day at November 13th, 1997. That's a pretty important date because that's what Jane said that she saw. The play, not the movie. So if she was in New York with Epstein in 1997 watching the play, she was 3 years older than she would have been if she was in New York watching The Lion King, the movie, which came out in 1994. Did she go to a movie theater or did she go to a play? It's obvious, says the defense, that she went to the play. That makes her 3 years older. We have another flight record showing that she returned from a trip at age 17. We have another happy birthday song that Jane sang to Mike Wallace on a flight log showing her age. The parties stipulate that Mike Wallace's birth date is on 1918, May 9th, 1918. So if she sang a birthday song to him, and we know what song that was, what age that was, and you can pinpoint all of these dates. Jane is 18 years old the first time she indicates in a document that Epstein will pay for her. So apparently those other school payments were from maybe somebody else. But as soon as she turns 18, she acknowledges Epstein's going to pay for her. At age 19, she sends a headshot over to Epstein. Hey, look at me. Jane took several flights at Epstein's expense when she's 19 and 20. Okay, we have the transactions. You can look at them. They've got her names. They've got the dates. We know her birth date. We know her age. She's 19 and 20 when all this is happening. More testimony comes out. As you sit here, you're not sure whether you were ever in a room with Ghislaine and Epstein, right? She says no. So they summarize this for you very simply. We're going to talk about Jane here. Very easy, folks, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Jane can't remember anything because it didn't happen. It's obvious. All those I don't recalls, all those I'm not sure's, well, it's because she doesn't remember anything. Well, because it didn't happen. We have trial transcript that says she's not sure if Ghislaine Maxwell ever touched her, quote, during these encounters. She's not sure if Ghislaine Maxwell ever touched her. And they're referencing the trial transcripts. They say back in December 2019, she said she does, quote, not have a recollection and is, quote, not sure if Ghislaine touched you during these encounters. Said that in December. At trial, now her story changed, obviously. At trial, she comes out and says, well, I don't remember. But it's written right here in the document. Jane's also not sure if Maxwell ever kissed her. We see that from a trial transcript. And Jane, from trial transcript, also, quote, doesn't recall Ghislaine ever giving her a talk about how to massage Epstein. So all of that testimony seems pretty lacking. But Jane does seem clear about a number of other things that Ghislaine never did see. Says that Ghislaine never saw her perform something on Epstein. Ghislaine never saw her perform something else on Epstein. Ghislaine never used toys on her. Ghislaine never saw her have intercourse with J.E. So you see what they're trying to do here? They're trying to disqualify a bunch of other activities. They're saying Jane said that she's not sure about any of these other things. Not sure if Ghislaine was in the room. Not sure if this happened. Not sure. But she is sure about a bunch of other stuff. She's sure as heck that there was none of that type of activity. There was none of that type of activity. There were no torpedoes being used. She's sure about those things. She's also sure that Ghislaine Maxwell never saw her sleep with Jeffrey Epstein. She's sure about that. She's also sure that she says that she has no memory of Ghislaine being present with Epstein engaged in contact with her. Transcript 477, don't remember. Jane testified in court. How many times during the years you were 14, 15, and 16 was Maxwell in the room while you were being abused by Epstein? I don't know, she says. Was Maxwell in the room once while it was happening? No. Was it twice? No. Approximately how many times? She says, I don't know, but it was more than twice. Something about marrying a race car driver. And Jane, remember this testimony? You also told the government about a woman named Ava who joined in, right? And you said she joined in with Sophie, right? What's the exact question? Joined in with Sophie? We see a flight now from November 11, 1996. Sophie and Ava. Jane's testimony was that Sophie and Ava joined in on these group activities. So the defense digs this out. 1996, we see a flight with Sophie and Ava. Having a conversation now with Jane during cross-examination. We've got Ava and Sophie. You also talked about Emmy. You said she was a part of this. She was British, right? She said she was nice and cool. Yeah. You said she was involved in this contact, right? Yes. And she was involved in the group contact, right? Yes. And there was a fourth woman you remembered, right? Yes. Her name was Michelle, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. And Michelle was short. Yes, she was. And you also hung out with Emmy and you went out with them and you claimed that Michelle was also involved in some of this, right? And she was also involved in the group massages. Yes, 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 and yes, and yes. Involved in all of them. And you can just see, I mean, this goes on and on. They're spending a lot of time on Jane. It looked like maybe it was light. What was in the room? She says, I don't think I saw anything past the massage table. You recall a massage room that was attached to the bathroom, right? That's my memory, she says. Yep. So we see a photograph now. The defense is admitting. Bunch of redacted photographs on the wall, but it looks like a massage table. We see a little bit of a blueprint here in Government Exhibit 297. Looks like it is a top-down view of the master bath and the master bedroom. Two different bathrooms, it looks like, sort of adjoining, maybe a his and a hers. We see another photograph, 278, of the bathroom with the shower with all the glop. Then we have interlock-in records that show that Jane did not move into the house until 1996. We have more records that no individual was paying for Jane to go to school. Jane's 18 the first time she says that Epstein's going to pay for her. Lawyers told Jane that cooperating is going to help her case. She said that nobody else abused her, and Jane was also awarded $5 million. Here's a copy of the general release form that she signed back in 2020. Her lawyer said it's going to help her case. Guess what it did? She got awarded $5 million for this thing. And that's just Jane. So now let's talk about Annie Farmer, says the defense. There's a limiting instruction about Miss Farmer, and this is what the judge said. I instruct you that the alleged physical contact that she says occurred with Epstein and Maxwell in New Mexico was not, quote, illegal sexual activity, end quote. Says you may not consider the testimony as any kind of reflection on Epstein or Maxwell's character or the propensity to commit any of the crimes charged in the documents. What the judge is saying is when Annie talks about any of this activity there in New Mexico, you are not to consider that to be harmful. That was not illegal. It's not being charged as being illegal in the indictment. So all of that testimony, the jurors are supposed to sort of put a mental blockade there and say that you can't consider those to be propensity to commit crimes charged in the documents. In other words, you can't say that because of what you heard here about that conduct, that that's going to influence your opinion on any of the other charges. We'll see if that works or not. So the judge limited that. Then we get into the direct testimony of Annie Farmer. Says, Annie, you understood that Epstein was going to help you get into college and pay for stuff, right? She says, yeah. We get a note now that in New York, Farmer spent 99% of her time with her sister doing New York visitor activities. And they highlight some of these. Apparently, Annie wrote back in June 1996, says, it has been a couple of weeks since I got back. I've gotten back into the swing of things. A couple of quick details about New York I didn't mention earlier. Went to see The Duchess. And it looks like a decent play. And the Blue Man Group takes off. Broadway, really cool production. Went to see something where I got some cool stuff. Went to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. Went to the Met. Pretty fun New Year's Eve party. Went to the thrift stores, where I got an amazing dress for prom. It's from the 50s. It's got pink flowers. It sounds beautiful. And do you know that there was no activity that occurred while you were in Epstein's home, right? Says Annie. Annie says, yeah, that's right. There was no activity that occurred while you were there. No physical contact that happened. No torpedoes or anything like that. She says, right. And even if there were, right, Maxwell was not there with you while you were there, right? Annie says, yeah, that's true. And you were told that the Victims' Compensation Fund is that So what you told them, the Victims Compensation Fund, that you were abused in a movie theater, right? And Annie says, yeah, that's right. It happened at a movie theater. And so Menninger said, okay, but Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't at that movie, was she? She said, that's right. Ghislaine Maxwell was not there at all. Okay, did you meet Ghislaine Maxwell at all when you were in New York? Annie Farmer says no. And Ghislaine Maxwell had no role in the logistics of your travel. She didn't fly you there? No. She didn't buy you a ticket? No. She didn't arrange for your travel? No. She didn't call your mother before you went to New York? No. She didn't encourage you to go there, did she? No. She didn't transport you there, did she? No. Okay. And you had never seen her before you came to New York, right? Yeah. And you had never talked to her before you came to New York, right? Yeah. And again, Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't a part of this conversation at Epstein's house? Nope. And he didn't even mention during her trip. He didn't even mention her at all. Annie says, I don't really remember that one. But Maxwell was not there the entire time. And I want to be very clear about this, says Menninger. You know those journals you were writing? There is no entry in any of your journals that relate at all to Ghislaine Maxwell. Is that true? She says, that's correct. And it's true that if you had other journals from your senior year, no mention of Ghislaine Maxwell in there either, right? She says, nope, didn't talk about her. And when you wrote in your journal about that hand-holding thing, you said it was not weird. You said it was normal and fine, didn't you? Yeah, but I also said it weirded me out. And then you said it's not a big deal. She says, yeah, I really didn't think it was a big deal. And so you used both versions, right? It's weird and it's not weird, didn't you? She says, yes, I did. But today, your memories are colored by hindsight, aren't they? And she says, of course they are. And you were colored in your memories of hindsight by what happened in New Mexico, for example. Right? Annie says, does that affect how I perceive what happened to me in New York? She says, yeah, it does. I'm sure it does in some ways. So you can see what she is getting her to admit. You can see right there. They're saying that Annie Farmer may have been abused by Ghislaine Maxwell in New Mexico. In her understanding of abuse. Legally, maybe it's not abuse at all. The judge said she's over the age of 17. It's not abuse at all, at least as charged, right? If you wanted to call it, adult assault or adult criminality, that's fine, but it's not a minor because she's not technically a minor. So what the defense attorney is getting at here is that Annie Farmer is conflating the two stories. Ghislaine Maxwell may have actually abused her to some criminal degree in New Mexico, and that is being transferred through her memory to a New York incident that Maxwell had no part of from the record. And because the judge gave the limiting instruction about Annie Farmer as to the New Mexico charges, those are no longer relevant. So it has to sort of connect Annie's testimony back to New York. Okay, so we go back here. The defense attorney is basically getting her to admit that the New Mexico incident may have tainted her memory as it relates to New York. Asks Annie as this continues, you don't have any memory of how the New Mexico trip was planned, right? She says, right. And that's because you don't have any journal entries from that time period, do you? She says, I have not had a journal to help me refresh my memories of how that was planned. But what you told the FBI in 2006 was that you were going to go and accompany your sister, Maria. And that's what you told the FBI, right? And she says, I don't recall that, but that's what's written here. You have no knowledge that Ghislaine Maxwell made your travel plans, no personal knowledge that she encouraged you to travel to New Mexico, right? I do not. I do not. So remember about that conspiracy? That Ghislaine Maxwell is supposedly involved, that she's helping to orchestrate and maneuver and fly these girls all over the place. We got testimony from two people. Jane said, no idea that Ghislaine Maxwell was encouraging her, signing her up, didn't call her mom, didn't book the plane tickets, didn't help her pack her bags, none of that. Same thing happening here. Annie Farmer, Ghislaine Maxwell had no idea about the travel plans. No knowledge, didn't encourage you to travel to New Mexico at all. So how can she be a part of the conspiracy? You did not talk to Miss Maxwell ever before you even arrived to New Mexico, did you? That's correct, she says. And you don't actually know that Ghislaine Maxwell saw Epstein holding your hand, right? So she didn't see any of this stuff either? Nope, I don't. You just said that she was present on the other side of him, right? Yep, that's right. He was there. Didn't see it, have no idea. And you testified on direct, Annie, that Ghislaine massaged your chest, right? Yeah, in the area of your pectoral muscles, right? And she says, yeah, I mean, I guess that's all part of the breast, right? And did Ghislaine touch your nipples? She did not touch my nipples. And so let me just be clear. She also did not touch your nipple area, right? Right. Oh, well, there you go. It's a therapeutic massage. You know, sometimes when you're doing some serious bench press out there, your pectorals can get a little bit sore. You know, it's a good feeling. It feels good. You feel like you did something that day. And it's good. And that's all this was, obviously. It's just a little chest massage. She was sore from bench pressing or doing push-ups. But Ghislaine Maxwell did not touch the nipples, which is very, very important. Any nipple touching could be a whole different ballgame. We have another question here from Annie Farmer, to Annie Farmer. You told agents back there in May of 2020 that the body massage was awkward and uncomfortable, but it wasn't explicitly sexual, was it? Annie says, I don't believe those are my words. I think that's what's noted here. It says no touching of the nipples, but I did clarify that, but not that it did not happen. Okay, but you have no memory of him seeing you, right? That's right. And he was not in the room for this massage, right? That's right. Talking about Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell didn't enter your room. Remember that story about Jeffrey Epstein going into Annie's bed and kind of cuddling with her? When that happened, Ghislaine didn't go in, did she? Nope. And she was not in there the whole time that happened. When Jeffrey Epstein just wanted to be a little cuddle bug with you, Ghislaine, was she involved at all? No, she wasn't. So let's get this clear. So what you told the Victims' Compensation Fund is that you were abused in a movie theater, right? Yep. And you were abused in a movie theater in New Mexico, right? Yep. And both of those were related to hand-holding incidents that happened in those two locations, right? She says, yeah, that's what I put in my application to the compensation fund. I was abused for holding hands. Okay, so Annie, you're saying that hand-holding is abuse. Is that what you're saying? Annie says, my experience was detailed in the application, okay? Which included, yes, him holding and caressing my hands. I did not say that anything else happened to me in the movie theater. So you can see the defense is really trying to rub her nose in this one. But again, this is tactical because they can't really talk about anything else. They can't talk about any of the other abuse that's in New Mexico because it's not illegal, as charged under the indictment. And so because her hands are tied, because she can't say or get into that, the defense is going to say, oh, it's just the hand holding. That's it. That's what this whole thing's about. All of this, all your pain and horror and all your suffering for all these years because he was caressing your hands is what they're saying, because she can't talk about the other stuff because it's not illegal as charged under the indictment. And so they're just going to continue to do that. Annie Farmer's testimony goes on. Okay, so that little massage, all that stuff. What you were told, the Victims' Compensation Fund, you said that your breasts were groped, right? That's what you wrote in there? Annie says, yeah, but I don't see that as significantly different. But, okay, so you said rubbed, groped, massaged. Yes, but not your nipple area, right? Or any of that? Nope, didn't touch the nipples. But you told them that your breasts were groped, right? So how do you grope a breast without getting the nipple? And you said that the touching of the breast without the nipple contact was also abuse, right? She says, yes, it was. And so you also told the Epstein Victims Fund that Epstein rubbed his genitals against your bed, right? And that's all about, of course, Epstein, not Maxwell. Annie said that her sister was going to accompany her on the trip to New Mexico. Apparently she said that previously. They go back to the FBI document, page 2, year 2006. This is what you said, isn't it? She says, yeah, I see it says that. And so you told the FBI in 2006, right? Well, she says, I don't recall that, but yeah, that's what's written here, so I guess it's true. So her memory is a little bit bad also. Is another question, who was the one responsible for canceling Maria's trip? That Epstein or Maxwell was one of them. How long were you in New Mexico? She says it was a weekend trip. But it's very interesting, they say, because if you go back through Epstein's flight logs, no weekend trips to Santa Fe in April and May of 1996. So testimony is a little bit wrong there. Go back through the flight logs, never landed there, never flew over there, can't prove that. Annie Farmer is mistaken. Has no idea what she's talking about. There were also no weekend trips to Santa Fe. In April of 1997, Annie Farmer was 17, almost 18 in 1997. We can take a look at the flight logs, take a look at the birth dates, take a look at the calendar. We have a customs list, date of birth. So this would be very similar to what we talked about earlier with Jane, right? There's probably a document that looks just like this, except Jane's was redacted because her identity is hidden. Annie Farmer, date of birth, Eastern time, 7/20/1997 is when she landed. We have a description, department location, Dusseldorf, Germany. Annie was asked about that. In that summer when Annie was in Thailand, you were in Germany, right? Yes, I was. Somebody else was brought in to testify. Talking about the boots, remember the boots? You wore a lot of them. I mean, because that's the general term. I didn't wear them to work or anything, but I did wear them when I would go stepping. And you went dancing in the boots that Epstein brought for you, correct? Yeah. And you wore those so much to the point where the heels are worn down and the toes are scuffed? You wore the boots that your abuser bought you? She says, yes, I did. Well, that's a weird thing. You know, if you were so harmed by these people, why are you walking around with their boots on? So we asked some other good questions here as we get to the close of this thing. Where was everybody else? Where were the other witnesses? Multiple friends listed in her diary, the employees at the ranch, the driver. She was talking about the ranch chef. Where were they? We asked her about the chef, couldn't remember. Employees at the ranch, the driver, couldn't remember. Employees at the ranch hand, couldn't remember. We didn't hear from Farmer's sister, Maria. Why didn't the government call her? Or any of the other friends listed in the diary? We're also seeing a missing journal. We know that Annie Farmer had a journal, but all we get is the front and back of it. We don't get to see all the different documents inside. And if you think about it, says Menninger, this is the connection between everybody. The reason why all this is so messy is because there's an incentive to do that. Money changed Farmer's story. That's it. Money. Back then, when she was talking with the FBI, she said something differently than she said now. You told the agents and the government in May of 2020 that the body massage was awkward and uncomfortable, but not exactly explicit, right? Well, that's what she said. But then it changes. June 25th happens. Guess what happens in June 2020? Epstein's compensation fund opens up. In 2006, you can see here all the way up until the years leading up, Annie Farmer's story is that it was not anything that was explicit. But then guess what happens? June 25th happens. Epstein Compensation Fund opens up. Boom, the day after that, guess what happens? Annie Farmer submits a claim where everything is now explicit, including the hand-holding that took place on the movie theater. 1 day after the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund opens up, boom, Annie Farmer has a claim ready to go. Farmer then gets $1.5 million for her story about this abuse in a movie theater. $1.5 million, the compensation offer, is going to resolve all of these claims. And so her story changes. Why? Because she needed it to fit the narrative in order to be compensated. We have a brief recounting of Kate. We get the instruction from the court. Any conduct is not illegal activity. I instruct you, this witness is not a victim of the crime charged in the indictment. We go back, we see some purchases of land, some transitions from certain people, proprietor, Ghislaine Noel, Marion Maxwell now gets title of this property. And so Kate, you just throw Kate out. Now let's talk about Carolyn. Carolyn only identified Epstein and Kellen as involved in her claim. Carolyn, you can see here, wrote and signed off on a series of interrogatories in a civil lawsuit. It says, state the names of anybody else who might have abused you. Guess what she put there? None. Nobody else. She didn't list Ghislaine Maxwell. Why is that? Well, that happened in February of 2009. Yeah, she was filing lawsuits, but she said none. But guess what happened? In 2020, the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund opened up. Now, guess what? Ghislaine Maxwell suddenly magically appears there. Previously, only identified Epstein and Kellen. Here's what she said. I was introduced to Epstein in 2002. I was to give him a massage. I continued to provide massages until 2003. She names Epstein's house Yellow Cab, Epstein, Virginia, ex-boyfriend Sean, mother Dorothy, brother. I was transported via private car by Epstein. Anyone else? Nope. Not Ghislaine Maxwell. Message pads show Carolyn calling for Epstein. So they go back through all the different message pads and they say, oh, look, Exhibit 2P, 2U, 2T, 2O, 2M, 2D, 2B. Carolyn calls in. She's calling for Epstein. Hey, I want you. I need you. What's up? Let's hang out. Can I get this? Whatever. But guess who she's not calling for? Ghislaine Maxwell. All of those messages are for Epstein. There was an idea that Ghislaine Maxwell was pregnant. Never happened. They say Carolyn was talking about Maxwell. You said that you saw that she was pregnant, right? Yeah, she was nude and pregnant, lying on the wall. And she was pregnant. Carolyn says, yeah, multiple pictures, nude photos. Okay. You worked for Ghislaine from 1996. Did you ever see her pregnant? This is from Simberly Espinoza now, another witness who's going to smash Carolyn's testimony. No, never saw her pregnant. Worked for her for a long time, never saw her pregnant. Ever told she was pregnant? Nope. Sean now, Carolyn's ex-boyfriend. Did you and Carolyn ever talk about Maxwell when all this was going down? Sean says no. And you and Carolyn were using cocaine, marijuana, ecstasy, other stuff during that time, right? Yep, sure were. And you would occasionally answer the phone, wouldn't you? Yeah. And who would be calling? Well, either be Epstein or Sarah Kellen. Not Maxwell. And you knew Sarah was calling because she was calling on behalf of Epstein, didn't you, Sean? Sean says yes. It wasn't Ghislaine calling, it was Sarah. And in that meeting, the phone meeting, you identified two people that called you. Sarah, another European woman. You said it was a British accent you couldn't identify, right? And he would tell you before he got there, oh, this is from Juan Alessi. That's from Sean. Yeah, so he couldn't identify Ghislaine. Then we go over to Juan Alessi. Juan Alessi now would remove the pictures of Maxwell in the house. Juan says, yes, he did. When other people would come over to the Epstein residence, remember that the Maxwell pictures would come down. And then when the guests would leave, the Maxwell pictures would go back up. And Alessi was part of that. Professor Loftus was the defense the defense expert witness. And you can see what the defense is doing here. Like, look how beautiful this slide is. Did you see anything like this in the government's slide deck? No, you didn't. They had a blue background that looked like it was typed up on one of those old computers I had in 5th grade. It says that she's a distinguished professor. A distinguished professor. And a professor and faculty and education, BA, MA, PhD, elected all over the place, numerous award and honorary degrees. She's just the best, isn't she? Now, here is what Dr. Loftus told us, and this is what they are communicating to the jurors. And this is how they're explaining to the jurors to decide the case. We just told you everything. Here's the problem with the memory. It weakens over time. It is malleable. You can change it. You can maneuver it. And it's impacted and corrupted by post-event contamination. Media, different things can go in there and adjust your memory. Interviews, the act of having a conversation with somebody can skew your memory. Conversations can skew your memory. Lawyers can skew your memory, especially when there's lots of money on the line. A lot of incentives to change the story a little bit. And so you can see how these slides look. Now, on direct examination, Dr. Loftus told us there are 3 major stages that we can study when we're talking about the process of memory. Sometimes things can suggest things to themselves. People can suggest things to themselves. It's called autosuggestion. Somebody's not deliberately trying to suggest something to you, but you can draw your own conclusions. Then there is post-event suggestion. A little information, misinformation can enter a witness's memory and cause some contamination. It can alter some of the little details. It can even supplement the memory. So if you've got some gaps and some holes, this will fill it in. Sometimes people are just trying to retrieve information and there's more pressure to provide more details. And so guess what? The memory constructs them. We take bits and pieces and experience, and sometimes it occurred at different times and places, and we smash them all together. And we construct what feels like a recollection, but it isn't. It's just an amalgamation of all these little bits of memories that we concoct into a recipe. And so now, folks, this is where the defense leaves the jurors with a bunch of X's, which is exactly perfect. Count one, we know 4 victims: Jane, Annie, Kate, Carolyn. Not guilty as to all of them. Count 2, only Jane. Not guilty for her. Count 3, same thing. Not guilty as to all 4 victims. Count 4 is Jane only. Not guilty. Count 5, Carolyn and unnamed others. Mere presence, they say, is not enough. The fact that Ghislaine was there is not enough. And count 6, Carolyn and the unnamed others, not guilty. They leave the jurors with these calls to action. Presumption of innocence. When you go and you look at those jury instructions, take a look at page 7, paragraph 12. The law presumes the defendant to be innocent of all charges. Ms. Maxwell does not have to prove her innocence. It is always the government's burden to prove each of the elements of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And let us define reasonable doubt for you people. It is doubt based in reason and arising out of the evidence in the case or the lack of evidence. You can see they underline that in red. If you have such a doubt as would reasonably cause a prudent person to hesitate in acting in matters of importance in his or her own affairs, then you have a reasonable doubt. And in your circumstances, in this circumstance, it is your duty to acquit Miss Maxwell of that charge. So they leave them with this: not guilty on all counts, right? And that's it. We have a redacted slide. Now, that's the end of the defense slides. This is the end of the government slides. So we see a bunch of text over here. Here we see some good language, and we see a bunch of X's. So you can determine which one is more effective. But that was the end of Ghislaine Maxwell closing arguments slides presented by the defense. And we have a short couple minutes to take a couple questions before we jump on out of here. I see, oh my God, this is awesome, over on YouTube says, isn't there an exhibit GX662RR with less redactions? We want to see that one. I'm not sure which one that is. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, a lot of redactions. We'd all like to see them. Thanks for the support there. Oh my God, this is awesome. We have Marion Holtzman with a very nice donation. No question on that, Marion. Thanks for being here, for being a part of the show. I very much appreciate that. And because it's Tuesday, we have just a short time for a couple questions. Let's take a look at the poll form. By the way, the poll form is now linked, and so I'm refreshing these from time to time. Ooh, this number has changed dramatically. Not guilty on all counts. Wow, that number has changed pretty badly. It used to be a lot more varied. Wow, interesting. So that has changed pretty dramatically. Trial is rigged. That's pretty consistent. 90, I should just get rid of that question. And then Epstein was killed. Folks, these are all going in one direction. It's funny. They used to be, you know, the mouth of the Pac-Man used to be a lot bigger. But now they're all tightening up. Epstein was killed. Trial is rigged. Maxwell not guilty on all counts. Sounds like a lot of people are as jaded as I am over this whole thing, which is just hysterical. Okay, a couple questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I am already running late for my group, but that's all right. Juror 69 says, honest opinion, this trial was more about Epstein rather than Maxwell. I think she walks free. The most intriguing thing about this trial is the discovery of the black book of clientele. The clientele will do everything in their power to suppress the information from it. Yeah, I think it needs to be deeper than that. The black book itself is already out. It's publicly available. It's all, you can actually, there's a website that has the whole thing indexed, so you can search for it. They're all just going to deny. The real stuff that I think is really, really problematic would be anything that Maxwell knows or that Epstein had in his little vault, which is a different concept than the black book. But it's good to see you, Juror 69. We have another one from Nikki Dragon says, if found guilty, do you think the state or the feds are going to go after anyone else associated with Maxwell and Epstein? I don't. I think that if Maxwell is convicted, they're going to just say, oh, oh, we're just going to put a bow on this and we're done. That's great. Oh, this international ring of global oligarchical monsters? Yeah, no, we're done. We got it all. Grouchy old cat lady says, why didn't the defense enter it into evidence? They probably wouldn't have been able to do that because it was only for impeachment purposes. It's not an actual exhibit. Good question. Sergeant Bob says, very informative about cleaning up the transcripts. Appears the jury is very scrupulous in reviewing testimony. Having once testified as a defendant with other officers and agencies in a federal district court, it seemed to me, well, that's an interesting story there, Sergeant Bob. Whoa. It seemed to me that then the federal jurors are a cut above the state level jurors. I can say that women, especially minors, who have suffered abuse and sexual assault are the perfect victims for sexual criminals like Epstein at all. They have no sense of self-worth. That's from Sergeant Bob. That's a good point, right? And I think that is exactly what Dr. Rocchio was talking about when she was talking about grooming. Kincaid says, greetings, Rob. I must apologize for yesterday. The joke was within the word torpedo. I didn't realize that perhaps you couldn't engage due to YouTube speech restrictions again. Sorry. It does make me wonder how long it will be when even innocuous speech is restricted en masse and all we can do is nod in acknowledgement. The English language is expressive and allows people to communicate freely and relate regardless of background. When it dies, halls will not echo, whispers shall lay still, and all that'll remain is an empty, speechless chill. It's so bad and wrong, it badong. That's from Kung Pao. Enter the Fist, a kung fu comedy movie. I have not seen that one, but it does look funny. I've seen the previews on that one. A few more. T. Blakemore says, what would you do differently, if anything, if you were defending Maxwell? Would you adopt the same strategy? And what would your expectations of the prosecution and the judge be going into such a trial? T. Blakemore, that is a meaty question, my friend. I'm going to have to save that one for a locals stream. So let me do that right now, because I'm running out of time. All right. But it's a great question. Not much. Those are probably the best attorneys on the planet. Sergeant Bob says, perhaps Maxwell could enjoy turkey-flavored Spam for Christmas. Sorry for the bad popo for the moment. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, it's going to be her birthday, Sergeant Bob. Maybe she'll be lucky. Sergeant Bob says, maybe one day you will personally be prosecuting a case. Miss Lucky and I will attend and bring our own bucket of popcorn. I don't think so, Sergeant Bob. I'm a pure blood defense attorney. There's no going around that. Thunder 7 says, wasn't the 2016 legal settlement with Virginia versus Maxwell going to be made open to the public? Yeah, it is. It's going to happen. Actually, the settlement is not Virginia versus Maxwell. It's Virginia versus Dershowitz, and it's Virginia versus Prince Andrew. Yeah, so if you go into the mind map on here, you'll see that both of these settlement agreements are going to be available, I think, next year. Did I screenshot that? Yeah, I think next year they said. So we'll see. Back over to the questions. What happened to that? Yeah, it's going to be made public. It's not going to impact jury deliberations. Doesn't happen until next year. Can the jury continue deliberating? Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can deliberate after Christmas. If they don't get to a verdict after Thursday, judge will excuse them on Friday. They'll have to come back for next week. Good to see you, Thunder 7. Thanks for the questions. Monster 1 says, prohibitive? Like Epstein with a torpedo and a 14-year-old? Is that too much? Vientica says, does that shade of blue remind anyone else of the Commodore 64? Well, I guess I dated myself. Like the Oregon Trail, that was black and green, wasn't it? There was another game that had the blue like that. Grouchy old cat lady says, money transfers. Why didn't the defense have his accounting recoded to prove what the transfer was for? Every transaction normally has an account, went into at very least. Most have documentation supporting the transaction, even if it was a gift. Yeah, and I think what the defense was doing is trying to sort of, it's kind of, that concept, security by obscurity. It's like, okay, it's $7 million, right? To you and me, it's like, my goodness, that's a lot of money. But to Jeffrey Epstein, it's nothing. It's like tip money. He's got planes, he's got boats, he's got islands, he's got properties all over the place. He's living lavishly. So what is $7 million? Who cares? It's nothing. It's tip money. And so I think that's what they were trying to communicate. Sergeant Bob says, looks like the defense shows all the Epstein properties planes to deflect away from Maxwell. Very true. Good move. But I don't think the jury is going to buy it. That's from Sergeant Bob. We'll see. We'll see soon. Also says, billable hours multiplied to the extreme by all lawyers. Just compensation is okay. But millions? Yes, Sergeant Bob. Attorneys should be making millions, all of them. Leafy Bug says, just stopping by to say hello to you and the crew, Rob. Yesterday's show had me laughing out loud. I learned that if you see an all-girls junior high school that looks like it has way too many wheelchair ramps, it could have been an Epstein favorite. Might send my kids somewhere else. Sorry to ruin the surprise, but I got you the regular double torpedo for Christmas. With the remote? Did it have the remote or no? If you're going to have a double torpedo, that's a lot to manage. You need to have remotes on those things. If you're going to have a remote, or if you have an option for a remote, you're going to take the remote. No doubt about it. He says, don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'll send the receipt so you can take it back to the shop and swap it for the remote controlled model. Hope everyone gets what they want for Christmas. Well, thank you, Leafy Bug. I'm not looking forward to it, but it's going to be a lot of fun when it arrives. Tobiz Jr. says, you're doing such an amazing job helping us live through the case. I would love to see you in action in court. Are you ever in a case that is aired to the public? No, I mean, no, not currently. No, I'm not going to be in any of those. My active caseload has come down, and the active litigation is done by the team largely here, which are incredible team. We have an incredible team. I tell everybody they're much better than I am at what they do in the courtroom. So that is true. Good to see you, Tobiz. Maybe one day in the future, maybe I'll get back into the swing of things, but largely my skill set is being utilized in different ways around the firm. But thanks for thinking about that. I'm glad that you're enjoying the content and the conversation. I'm having a lot of fun as well. And that, my friends, is it for us for the day. I want to thank everybody for the support. Final shout outs to everybody over on Locals, on Rumble. We've got Freedom Falls. We've got Vienticus Prime, TYCH News is in the house. Angela K's over there on YouTube. Shout outs to Pig76. We've got Playing Hooky, New Forest Pony, Danette, Lean, K Beans in the house. Zulu's over there. Marine Leo, Playing Hooky. And, I've got friends over on Twitch. I know that, but I can't see what the chat says over there. So, but I love y'all, and I'm going to try to figure out Twitch soon. I set up a second recording studio, not a recording studio, a second camera, so I can play a game in there maybe one day. We'll see. But I love you, Twitch. I love you, YouTube. I love you, Rumble. I love you, Locals. Everybody have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I will see you all here tomorrow. Same time. Be well, my friends. Bye-bye.